fear itself pre-exists the thing that one is afraid of. And that is really where this kind of, that's like the gateway to these things. And that's how a mind becomes a fertile ground for them to plant their seeds or lay their eggs or whatever it is that they do. I would say that long periods of possession are very, very rare, partly because people can't withstand it, and partly because the person's life becomes uninteresting to the demon after it's been run over to a certain extent. They're not so invested in participating in our world that they're going to like wander the streets with us and babble like idiots. And that does happen. Fear itself, though, and this is the interesting thing when it comes to the relationship with time, I mean, fear itself, all fear is fear of the future, necessarily. So it's an anticipatory thing. So when they're going into this, it really relies on the future idea and the person's concept for the future idea. And it's really, it brings me back to yoga again and trying to, what's the word I want? Revolutionize our concept of time personally ourselves, and how we relate to that concept is going to control how these entities have access to us and when they have access to us, and how that way we can control that access. Certainly, too, I think that it's valuable to go under a certain amount of like what I call fear therapy. Tantric yoga, we talked about before, is good for that. Literally, just even being able to identify, make a list of your fears, and actually go and do as many of them as you can that are not going to be, like, nothing that's going to be directly harmful to you necessarily, or at least not too directly harmful. Not advocating that anyone go out and like walk on tightropes or hang off bridges or anything like that. But at the same time, what it is possible to do, it's going to be valuable to put yourself through that experience. And it's not enough. There's some people who like to say that, well, life will give you these experiences, and that's true, life will, but there's a big difference between going through one of these terrifying experiences, or terrifying to you experiences, because you got put in that situation, and going through that same experience because you willed yourself to go through that experience. It's the presence of an active will that's crucial there. And people can do a lot of things. I personally use LSD quite a bit for this. I had a practice that I called terror tripping. It was just to induce myself into the greatest state of fear on the most amount of psychedelic drugs that I could, which was involved with different things. But that's a kind of a good virtual reality type setting, because I am going to come down in 8 hours and I will be fine. But for the period that I am under the influence, the object of fear is very real and very present and completely unavoidable. And going through that is, as I said, what prepares us for actually crossing the abyss. And if we look at Liber 156 is a good one to look at for this. This is where Crowley talks about our relations with Babylon and how we actually get across the abyss. And it's an ugly, ugly, ugly book. It's basically what it says is, you have to destroy your attachment. When you take this oath, the oath to do this, you have to destroy all your own aversions and all your own attachments. And it very much, what is present in the book is the idea that if you cannot detach yourself from what you're connected to or what you're invested in this reality below the abyss, it will be smashed up and taken away from you, and you will be forcibly stripped of it. And that's not a happy thing for most people. So usually this involves going through some kind of awful experience, and for Crowley it was no different. But in a way, when we work with the occult, we invite a certain number of those experiences and determine ourselves to go through them and to become stronger for going through them. And the final endpoint of that, of course, is what it describes in Revelations as the lake of fire, the annihilation of these ideas from the world. Am I forgetting anything? Oh yeah, I am forgetting something. There's one practical point that I actually forgot to mention earlier, and that's time. The times that the rituals are done. There's only certain access to certain spirits at certain times, and people really need to take that into consideration. Not just the planetary day and the planetary hour, but those are important. But I mean, the days of the year. You want to look at the controlling angel of the demon you're trying to deal with, and what days of the year it's present and active, and just not to get cute with it and mess around with that stuff too much. If you really want something bad enough, to go to the trouble of conjuring a demon to get it, it's not good to try to take shortcuts or scrimp on those kind of things. The Grimoire system of magic is so vast that if you try hard enough, you will probably find a spirit that falls into a reasonable time frame that you're trying to work with that can do something close to what you want to do. And it's not the worst idea in the world if you're going to do this devotedly, to sit down with a calendar and mark off what spirits are active at what times of the year, so you can use that as a reference point later and look back on it. Just for the purposes of planning and stuff like that. Preparation is very important.
How do you use the planetary hours? Do you think of Monday as the moon, or do you think of moonrise to moonset as the day of the moon?
No, I go with Mondays, the moon, Tuesday, Mars, so on and so forth. And the planetary hour, the way I do it anyway, is I start the planetary hour as the minute, starts at the minute of sunrise on the day, and it is the planet.
Yeah, and then you break it down to 12.
Yeah, and I go sunrise to sunrise.
Yeah. Okay.
Have we questions?
So when you're working with goetic spirits or more like negative entities per se, I don't understand why they would like. Aren't they uncomfortable if you're cleansing an area and inflaming yourself in prayer? Isn't that an uncomfortable container for them to manifest in? Because elementals, they say you shouldn't do that. Like, I haven't worked with goetic spirits before, but I mean, with things like even artificial elementals, you wouldn't like bring a fire elemental into like a watery environment or whatever, because that would be uncomfortable for it. So, isn't the spirit uncomfortable?
No, because
a question,
they're keyed into this system just as much as everything else is. So it's actually not uncomfortable for them because it's what's required for them to gain some kind of foothold in this reality. So the conjurations, the Goetia, yeah, they mention biblical imagery and biblical ideas and stuff like that, but without those, they can't manifest. So they still rely on that. And a large part of it too is that they really don't have a choice whether they're comfortable or not. If they're commanded by their controlling angel, they kind of have to show up. They can't really resist that. They lose a certain amount of their independence. I have actually, well, there's one sort of model of looking at demons where the best word that I could describe them as is disintegrated with the fabric of reality. And this is just kind of their way of integrating themselves. And that's a very technical way of looking at it, but I think it's got some value to it.
Do you think it's more important to follow you're following a specific framework, follow it by rote, or to personalize it more to your own beliefs and your own ideals?
Well, that's an interesting question, and that's kind of a tough one, actually, because I've worked. I would say if you're going to, I would say if you're going to modify it, just to completely chuck whatever you're working with and have something completely new, not to do minor modifications. Because I've tried to do that with a couple of people that I was working with that weren't comfortable with the biblical imagery and the
so just be inspired by it more than tinker with it.
Yeah. Like if you're gonna, like, don't tinker with it. Like if you're gonna, just chuck it completely and do your own thing. If you're gonna do your own thing, and then if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I personally, when I first started working with the Goetia, I still did it word by word with conjurations, although I had absolutely no investment in the biblical system at the time. And then over time, I came to become more invested in it as I saw it working and as I saw the spiritual authority that it had. I started to take it more seriously and look at it more closely.
Well, obviously, I mean, this would be accepting through your own research or whatever, if you found something that was perhaps a little bit more correct in the same line as what like if you wanted to correct this or do this or that, I guess stuff like that would be